unlike how it's been in, let's say, the US or even Japan. We've just not had the technology. The cars haven't been able to be as competitively priced, and automatics typically have been at the luxury end, a very, very small segment of it. But that's all changed right now. And a couple of years back, when Maruti first launched the Celerio, they brought in an AMT, which is an automated manual transmission, and frankly democratized automatics. In fact, it brought automatics really into consumers' mindset as an option. Also, what's happened is that now automatics earlier were much more expensive than their manual counterparts, and also they were not as fuel efficient as their manual counterparts. So that was another reason why automatics really didn't have too much demand. But it's all changing right now, because clearly what we are seeing is that people want the convenience. Traffic has gotten really bad. Well, not right now in this pandemic time. I think one thing good is that traffic is actually eased off. But typically, bumper to bumper traffic, that's what we're always faced with. And the convenience of an automatic is becoming increasingly hard to ignore, even if it comes at a cost. But the good thing is now that there's a wide range of automatics available to you, from something as basic as a clutchless manual transmission, which actually has just been launched. In fact, it's the lower end of the auto transmission chain, which is going to be, which is just coming out right now, right up to sophisticated torque converters and dual clutch transmissions, which a lot of luxury cars have. And in between, you've got CVTs, you've got AMTs. So really a wide range of automatics that there are. So just to quickly run you through, I mean, what is available. You've got the dual clutch transmission, which Volkswagen really kind of pioneered in India. It's a very efficient form of transmission, the most sophisticated. It uses 2 clutches, so your gear shifts are very, very rapid. Either when you're shifting up or shifting down, gives you a more connected feel. You've got the traditional torque converter, which again is a very smooth automatic transmission, but in terms of efficiency, really not that great. But again, torque converters have also fought back, so they are also becoming a very viable option. You've got the good old CVT, which is basically something which is great for a city car, cars which have small engines, not very high torque, because CVTs don't like very high torque. So these cars again have been really pioneered by Japanese manufacturers. So you've had Honda, you've had Nissan when they were here, and you even had Maruti Suzuki using CVTs. Again, these cars, a CVT driven car, it doesn't give you a very enthusiastic feel. It's got that rubber band effect, so enthusiasts don't find it has an absolute direct connection between the engine RPM and road speed. So that can be something which is a bit disconcerting, but clearly in terms of driving at an everyday vehicle in bumper to bumper traffic, CVTs have a very strong case. And then you've got the AMTs, which have really proliferated. AMTs is what, to be honest, we would call the poor man's automatic, clearly because it's limited to budget cars. It's a very basic technology. Basically what it does, you've got an electronic unit and hydraulic actuators which do the job of changing gears for you. It piggybacks on an existing manual transmission, but you don't have to change gears, you don't have to press the clutch, it's all gone. It's a 2-pedal system, and clearly that's what is now really increasingly popular. Again, not as let's say smooth, but I think the advantage of an AMT is that it's pretty fuel efficient, and it's quite cost effective as well. They don't cost that much more. So really this is an entry level automatic, and now Hyundai is bringing in an IMT. In fact, it's Hyundai and Kia. Kia were the first to announce it when they were showcasing the Sonet, that it would come with that, but Hyundai is coming with it in the venue, or has come with it in the venue already. And now this basically is a semi-automatic system. In fact, you don't need a clutch, but you do have to manually shift the gears, unlike in an AMT where you don't even need to do that. So really various forms of automatic transmission that we have. They've really proliferated the market. Automatics are gaining in market share. It's not hard to see why, because the convenience they offer is very, very hard to ignore. And to be honest, people are getting lazy. It's only pure enthusiasts which like that feel of rowing a gear lever, pressing the clutch, and that whole kind of cadence which is really special when you're a driving enthusiast. But having said that, some of the DSGs also give you a lot of let's say a great experience even when you want to drive fast or drive enthusiastically. So that's a little wrap up on automatics, and I thought with that we'll turn to some questions, because there are a lot of questions from you guys and lots of varied questions, some very interesting questions, and obviously there are some misconceptions also which we will try and address over here as far as automatics go. So starting off, we've got Subir Banerjee, who's asked us which type of automatic transmission is best for driving in city traffic. I think a CVT for me is really the best for stop-start traffic because it's really very smooth. It's a very seamless kind of an experience. You don't feel the gear shifts. It's a continuously variable transmission. So just by that, there are no fixed ratios. And off the line, it's quite responsive. It's fairly fuel efficient for city driving. They're quite compact. They're reliable as well. So CVTs really in small cars have been really the way to go. So that's AMTs also are okay, but quite honestly, especially in the lower gears, you get a lot of that head nod. So I think it's a bit more jerky. They're of course much cheaper, but CVT cars are definitely probably the best for driving in the city. So we've got Tapomoy Deb asking me an interesting question: any special care to be taken for automatic transmission cars in the monsoons? Well, I mean, there's nothing special you can do. Clearly, you would. It's just what you would typically do with taking your care in the monsoon. Obviously, you don't want to be driving it through floods. You want to be making sure that the maintenance schedules are kept. Some transmissions have transmission oil. You've got to make sure that that's replenished, but that's all part of your service schedule. So just stick to maintaining your car properly, just as you would, and within that, there's nothing really special to do for an automatic transmission. We've got Ashwant asking, why don't we get a DCT option for diesel cars? Well, frankly, you do get DCT options for diesel cars, and don't forget, I mean, Volkswagen really, they are the guys who had DCTs for their diesel cars. The whole Volkswagen group, starting with Skodas, with the Superb, all the way down to even cars like the Vento, which had the DSG mated to the 1.5 diesel. But I think clearly it's not happening right now because the combination is quite expensive. So a diesel in itself is more expensive than a petrol, and a DCT in itself is more expensive than other transmissions. So when you add the two together, the price really becomes hugely expensive, and the price of that car probably goes into the next segment. So I think there's very little demand because what consumers feel is that for that price they can get a bigger car and a more prestigious car. So this is really why and that's why a lot of manufacturers make sure that with their diesel engines, which are quite expensive, they kind of are a little modest in their transmission choices because they don't want it to be let's say get too expensive. But I think where you do, what is quite rare is a CVT with a diesel engine. You really don't see much of that because what CVTs don't like too much is that solid extra slug of torque at a very low RPM. The gearbox isn't designed for that sort of torque, so clearly people shy away from DCTs. I think one of the companies which has done a CVT, companies which has done a diesel CVT is Honda. They had done it with the Amaze, but don't forget they had even scaled down the power and torque for that because clearly, as I had said earlier, CVTs don't like a lot of torque, especially at low RPM. That sudden torque, they're not designed to take that. So diesel CVTs are quite rare. Diesel DCTs are not, but going forward, I think diesel automatics per se is going to be a category we are not going to see too many of, especially in the smaller segments. Again, for reasons which I just mentioned, is that they just get too expensive because the diesel itself is quite expensive, and adding a more expensive transmission just takes the price up that much further. So hope that answers the question. We've got Kaustubh asking, is a CVT reliable and do you recommend it to a first time buyer? How different will the cost of servicing be vis-a-vis a manual car? So yes, CVTs are generally very reliable, and quite frankly, the belt or chains, that's what really is the part that eventually needs to be replaced, and that is a cost. But these components last for practically the life of the car, over 1 lakh kilometers. So really no issue over there. They really don't require too much maintenance, and the fact that you don't have a clutch, which does tend to wear out, especially if it's a manual car. It depends on how the driver is driving it. You can have accelerated wear. So in a way, it's even more reliable. So I think CVT is nothing to worry about in terms of reliability in that front. And do you recommend it to a first-time buyer? Absolutely, I would recommend a CV to a first-time buyer simply because it gives you a very linear power delivery. There's not much hesitation. It's immediately responsive. And first-time car buyers, I would imagine, want the ease of driving to be high up on their priority list until they gain more experience and judgment. So you don't want to tax their judgment, you don't want to tax their lacks of experience, and for that reason a CVT works best purely because of how responsive it is and how linear the power delivery is. Abhijit is asking which is the best automatic transmission for a first time buyer. I think we've answered that, so that takes care of that. We've got Shefi asking, is an AMT better than a CVT? What are the drawbacks of an AMT? Well, let's talk about the advantages of an AMT first. One is the cost and one is the fuel efficiency. It scores on both fronts over a CVT. As I said, it's a poor man's automatic, so really it's light on your pocket even when you go to buy it and even when you have to pay the fuel bills. But it doesn't perform anywhere as nicely or smoothly as a CVT. The big drawbacks of the AMT is it's a single clutch system, so there's a lot of pause between gears. There's a lot of hesitation, especially in the lower gears, and the way the gears change, it's very slow, not as as seamless as we would have liked, and that can be quite annoying, a bit disconcerting. You don't get the response when you want it, and you get this thing called head nod, which is this kind of interruption of power in between gear shifts. So it's not a great experience, but for people who've never driven an automatic, going from a manual to that, it does the job, and there are not too many complaints on that front. It's only when you experience better automatics you realize that what you had wasn't that great. Gajanan's question is a very general question. Don't know what the real answer, which is the most reliable automatic transmission of them all. Well, all automatic transmissions per specification are all reliable because they're built to last, without really failing on you, but that doesn't happen. There have been high incidence of dual clutch failures, which is more than, let's say, something like a torque converter, which is really an old school automatic where the technology has been developed for years and years. CVTs are also reliable. AMTs are also fairly reliable. So I think in that front, to generalize, it's quite difficult. But clearly, I think it's just sometimes transmission specific. We did hear of Volkswagens earlier with DSG problems, but now their twin clutch is fine. There are really no major issues on that. That's been sorted. So I think overall all transmissions are getting more and more reliable. It's just that some are a little bit more sophisticated and complex than others, and clearly transmissions like torque converters, which I personally like very much, are really the good old school transmissions which are tried and trusted. So we've got now Kiran asking, are Hyundai and Kia the first ones to introduce IMT tech in the world, or has it arrived late in just India? There's been a great marketing kind of a blitz by both Hyundai and Kia talking about IMT. Actually, it's a very basic transmission. It's been around for a long time. It's been around for decades, and it's quite popular even in commercial vehicles. It just takes the sting out of driving. It's really not much by way of technology. So it's in that sense, I think it's not something new. It's something that's been around for a long time, but it's just been brought into India to give customers another option of automatic transmission. And having said that, what I want to say is Hyundai is actually an amazing company because it's the only one that gives you every type of automatic transmission, starting from the IMT, going to the AMT, which you have in the Santro. Then you've got CVTs in its range of Cretas. You've got the DSG, which they also have. You've got torque converters, which power their diesel cars. And you've got the good old manual straight transmission. So really Hyundai's got the entire lineup of automatic transmissions. So clearly goes to show that there is a market, there is a demand for each technology depending on the usage, depending on the budget, and depending on what the customer is looking for. Now Amarjit's asking a very interesting question. I guess obviously we are in the monsoon, so the questions do relate to that. Amarjit wants to know, for wading through water in a manual gearbox, one could create a bow wave by going at high RPM and half clutch. How does one achieve this with an automatic transmission? Well, firstly, you don't want to create a very high bow wave, because you don't want the engine coming back over the bonnet and into your intake system, and then you're toast. So I think what I think he's trying to say is that you want to go very slowly and keep slipping the clutch, because the key is you've got to keep your revs high, you've got to keep the exhaust pressure up so that water doesn't enter the exhaust, and that's what you can achieve with a manual transmission, by really keeping the revs high, first gear, and slipping the clutch and doing that. Little difficult to do in an automatic transmission because you don't have control of the clutch and you can't keep slipping it. I think at best what you can do is left foot braking, is keeping your foot on the brake and keeping the accelerator going to try and keep the revs up that way. But a lot of automatics don't even allow you to do that. They have rev lock. So clearly going through a flooded area in an automatic car, especially if it's not got great height, SUVs typically are okay, not a good idea. It's not as easy to do as in a manual car. Jyotish has a question, wants to know is for a person who wants a good vehicle, whose priority is not high power and prefers normal driving, which technology is best, CVT or DCT, which technology is more fuel efficient and easy in the pocket to maintain. So I think if you've been watching this, you'll know where I'm going over here. I think for city driving, CVT is a much better option. For several reasons. One is it's more responsive, it's smoother. The thing about DCTs is that they are great in terms when you're going fast and for performance, but at low speeds, you can feel the gear shifts. Clearly, it's not as seamless as a CVT is, not even as seamless as a torque converter. So in that sense, what you want is that low speed smoothness, which you get in a CVT. You don't get it in a DCT as much because the clutch is always engaging and you can feel that engaging, disengaging, and it's unlike when a CVT where it's just a constant transmission where the ratios are just continuously variable. Well, and we've got Ajay who's asking a question quite to the contrary, and again we know the answer to that. Which automatic transmission is appropriate for a driving enthusiast? Well, clearly that's where the DSG comes in. Just because of the super fast gear shifts, because the way the dual clutch works is by the time you've another gear is already pre-selected. That's what two clutches do. So going from one gear to another is very, very fast. In turn, takes milliseconds, especially when you're upshifting, especially when you're in your manual mode. It really makes you feel great. Makes you feel like a racing driver. Even when you're downshifting, if you're in the right rev band, it downshifts also very quickly. So no question about it, the DSG is the one if you're a driving enthusiast. Having said that, there are some torque converters also which are really good. I love the ZF 8-speed, which is there for longitudinal engines in luxury cars. But I think the DSG is really the benchmark when it comes to performance and for driving enthusiasts. Again, a question is here. I mean, I don't know how to answer this. What are the things to remember while driving an automatic? Well, I think good thing about driving an automatic, you don't have to remember the basic thing of pressing the clutch when you're about to come to a standstill. In fact, very often it's happened with me. After driving automatics for a long time, I get into a manual. Sometimes you realize, hey, I have to press the clutch as the car is juddering to and almost stop over there. So really, you don't have to remember too much when you're driving an automatic. But a few things I would say keep in mind are, remember that the responsiveness, that instant response of an automatic is not always as good as a manual. There's always a bit of lag. There's always that slight delay. So if you're doing some tight overtaking maneuvers, you need to keep that in mind. Another practice I like, especially with DSG, is just when you're at a standstill, I just put the car into neutral. Just don't want any stress on the clutch, want them completely disengaged. So that's what I would do. But otherwise, an automatic is something, whole idea is you just makes it so easy to drive that it's just a mechanical thing. You don't have to think. And so basically automatics, it's very easy. You don't have to remember much. Parag's asking a question, why do DCTs overheat? Is a torque converter better pick over a DCT, considering DCTs have reliability issues? Yeah, well, DCTs have been overheating. We've seen the problems that we faced many on multiple forums we've seen that the Kia DCTs have overheated, the Hyundai DCTs have overheated. This has been solved by a software issue. Basically what happens is that the clutch in these cases hasn't been disengaging fully when the car is coming to a standstill or a near standstill. So when it doesn't disengage fully, there's still some friction between the clutch plates, and that is what is causing the overheating. So I think with the new software, the clutch now disengages a lot more than earlier it did, and that problem is actually solved. But again, coming to a torque converters is a more, I think in India is a little bit more of a practical option, and it doesn't give you that more direct feel over DCT, but honestly most people drive in the cities and it does the job over there. Also theoretically they're not as fuel efficient as a DCT because you have a lot more transmission losses, because torque converters use hydraulic fluids, and really that's not as efficient. But I think torque converters also have their benefits for sure. And the other thing also on a DCT is in India, dry clutch DCTs have had more issues. People looking at a wet clutch DCT. Now, wet clutch DCT, it kind of solves the overheating issue, though not as efficient. Transmission losses are more in a wet clutch DCT, but clearly it's expected to be more reliable. Danielle asked me an interesting question, is why don't more luxury cars use CVTs? And again, it goes down to the earlier question of torque and power. There's a limit. I mean, CVTs can't take torque beyond a certain point or power beyond a certain point. And luxury cars, given their size, their performance, their engine sizes and all the power they develop, clearly, it's gone beyond that threshold. So that's one of the reasons why they don't have CVTs. Of course, we've had the exceptions. We've had Audis using CVTs, but again, they've moved from that to dual clutch gearbox. Vivek wants to know, why is there confusion over DCTs and DSGs? Isn't DSG just VW speak for a DCT? Yes, it is. If you ask me what it is, I can't even pronounce. It's a very long drawn out name. I'm sure a lot of you all would know that. But DSG basically is German for dual clutch gearbox. And really because Volkswagen and the Germans and even Porsche and racing have been pioneering this for a long time, DSG has become synonymous with DCT. Vineet has a question on DCTs again, and he is asking me, do you see DCTs making a comeback into or making their way into budget cars anytime soon? Not a comeback, making their way into budget cars anytime soon. I don't see this happening because clearly DCTs are an expensive technology, and putting it in a budget car would completely overprice it. It would be out of the segment. That's why budget cars actually have gone the other way and gone to AMTs, which is really a very affordable automatic. So DCTs not making sense. In fact, a lot of manufacturers are moving away from DCTs even in higher cars, like the next generation Rapid, Skoda Rapid and Volkswagen Vento, which actually pioneered DCT in this mid-size sedan. They are moving away. They are also coming with the good old torque converter. In fact, even the current Rapid and the Vento, which have just been launched, they also have torque converters, and going forward that's how it's going to be as well. So clearly there's an advantage to the torque converter, which even die-hard DCT users like the Volkswagen Group have seen, especially in their mid-size cars, is of more of a benefit in terms of cost, in terms of reliability, and the overall experience in city traffic, where torque converters also have a bit of an advantage over DCT. So yeah, the new Rapid and Vento, interesting. No more DCT. The automatic is going to be a 6-speed torque converter. Prithvi wants to know, a question is that why are automatics less fuel efficient than manuals? Well, not all automatics are less fuel efficient than manuals. Some of them are even more fuel efficient. It really depends on the technology. Now, typically CVTs and torque converters in particular, they are the ones which are the most inefficient theoretically, because it's driven by hydraulic fluid and a viscous coupling, and clearly this is not as efficient as having a clutch. which is really the most efficient way of transmission. And so in automated transmissions in DSG, you have clutches. So when they are engaged, it's as efficient as a manual car, which also has a clutch. CVTs also don't have a clutch, but they are also pretty efficient. And the technology has made them more and more efficient. So yes, overall, automatics not as fuel efficient as manuals, but the technology is closing that gap rapidly. So lots of questions. So I think I'm going to take probably the last one is is it a good idea to buy a diesel AMT cars, a diesel AMT car? Shift flags could make overtakes risky. Yeah, well, I think the head nod in a diesel can be a lot, and clearly it is a bit of a pain when you're overtaking, because as it is, the diesel is not very free revving, and there's it can be quite lethargic, and the AMT will make it even more lethargic. So if you are having an issue with that, I think it's best to avoid it. Stick to a good old manual if you can, because one would imagine that if you are using a diesel car, you are going to be doing a lot of long distance driving, and perhaps for those drives, you really don't need to use your gearbox that much, or your clutch that much, and you just be cruising a lot of the time, in which case a manual is fine. But I think the challenge really is that there are very few diesel automatics right now, especially in the budget or the mass car range. Very few people offering it, so choice is very limited, and sometimes the AMT is the only choice. So that's it, and well, I've got one last one, which is which I would like to take. It's Tanvir asking which one according to you is the best type of automatic transmission or form. Hard to say. I mean, each one has their pros and cons, but if I had to pick one, I still prefer the good old-fashioned torque converter. I mean, it's evolved so much. It feels so good. It feels, some of the good ones feel almost as direct, almost as responsive as a DCT, and there's a certain smoothness that they deliver, and especially that the initial torque build up, or the way it kind of the smoothness with which it takes off from the get-go, very difficult for others to match that. So for me, I'm a torque converter guy, but that's my personal choice, and clearly there is a transmission for every occasion, for every suitability, and every budget. So I hope with this we've been able to kind of clear a lot of your doubts on automatic transmissions. I think what's definitely here is that they're getting better and better. They're getting more and more affordable, and who knows, there could be a time when automatics replace manuals. But I think there's going to be a whole band or breed of us enthusiasts who will resist that, because finally the joy of shifting gears for enthusiasts with 3 pedals and a great gearbox is very hard to beat. That's very a subliminal experience. But on that note, I will say goodbye, and thanks all of you for watching us. Thanks for joining us on Interact, which has been brought to you by our partners, Reliance General Insurance, and all of us at Autocar. See you again, same time next month on another topic.